Hi, I'm Lindsey Graham, the host of Wondery's American Scandal. In our latest series, a social worker in Tennessee becomes rich and powerful by selling babies on the black market. By the time her crimes are exposed, she's made a fortune and destroyed hundreds of families along the way. Follow American Scandal on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Last year, Law and Crime brought you the trial that captivated the nation. And one question still lingers. Did Karen Read kill John O'Keefe? This isn't just a retrial. It's a second chance at the truth. Listen to episodes of Karen, the Retrial, exclusively and ad-free on Wondery Plus.
The amazing Kate Casey.
Welcome back for another episode of Reality Life with Kate Casey. I am so excited about this episode. I'm going to bring to you a story that you may have never heard about. It is one of the greatest, the nuttiest stories of sports history. Kaiser, the greatest footballer never to play football, is on Prime Video, and this story is wild. In the world of football, or as Americans call it, soccer, legends are usually forged on the field in dramatic goals, last-minute saves, and championship victories. But Carlos Henrique Raposo, simply known as Kaiser, became a legend for doing the exact opposite. Incredibly, he built a career as a professional footballer without ever playing a real game. His story is a masterclass in charm, deception, and survival, a real-life catch-me-if-you-can set against the backdrop of 1980s and 1990s Brazilian football. Now, becoming a professional football player is extremely rare, both globally and in football powerhouses like Brazil. Less than 1% of youth players in organized systems go on to play professionally. In Europe, a 2015 UEFA report found that only 0.5% of players in youth academies at elite clubs become professionals. Now, roughly 30 million people play football regularly in Brazil. An estimated 1 million children actively pursue football as a career in youth systems or amateur clubs. But of that, only 300 players per year sign professional contracts with top-tier or even second-division clubs. Well, in 1980s and early 1990s Brazil, football was more than a sport. It was a national obsession and a cultural cornerstone. The country had already produced global icons like Pelé and Zico, and clubs were flush with money, power, and larger-than-life personalities. So how was this man with no real footballing ability managing to fool club owners, teammates, and fans for years? Well, the answer lies in a perfect combination of timing, charm, and a deeply flawed system. Brazilian football at that time was a world of swagger and excess, but also minimal oversight. Club contracts were handed out liberally, often based on word of mouth or personal connections rather than rigorous scouting. It was also a time before social media or instant video analysis, so a player's reputation could travel faster than the truth. And Kaiser knew how to manipulate that. And he looked the part. He was athletic and handsome, with a body sculpted in the gym, and a mouth that worked even harder. He became friends with real stars, often partying alongside them, gaining credibility by association. He'd show up to training, warm up with the flair, and then he'd fake an injury, usually a pulled hamstring, just before the actual drills began. Now, he would stay on the sidelines, and he would charm staff, telling reporters he was rehabbing, and spinning tales about fake international offers to inflate his value. He even recruited journalists, feeding them fake stories and planting rumors that he was a rising star being courted by clubs in Europe. And in return, they got access, parties, sensational headlines. And when suspicions arose, he'd simply move to another club, armed with a fake CV, doctored photos, and glowing and fabricated references. Kaiser, the greatest footballer never to play football, is a riveting documentary that dives deep into this stranger-than-fiction tale. Now, it's directed by Myles, and the film unpacks how he managed to sign with top clubs, rub shoulders with iconic players, and avoid setting foot on the pitch, all while maintaining the illusion of a rising star. It draws on interviews, archival footage, and insider accounts. The documentary offers a captivating look at this man who scammed the system, not for fortune or glory, but seemingly for the thrill of the game that he never actually played. I spoke with Louis this weekend at home in the UK to discuss how this unbelievable story came to light, the psychology behind his hustle, and what his story reveals about image, identity, and the cult of celebrity in sports. Here's my interview. Louis, I cannot wait to talk to you about this project. I came across an Instagram post about it, and then I found your documentary, and then, of course, I tracked you down. This is such a hilarious, fascinating subject. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Real pleasure to meet you and be here.
So first, I got to ask you, how did you come across the story?
Oh, wow. Crikey. So I was making adverts for a football game, a soccer game, as you call it in America, called Football Manager. It's a very cult computer game where people pretend to be managers. And their head of business, a guy called Dr. Tom Markham, who's the only doctor of football in the world, came to me and said, I've got a story for you. And so I met him and his mates who worked in the City of London in a pub. And they told me about how this guy had this 26-year professional football career, never played a game. And he would fake injuries to keep contracts at clubs. And it was, no one knew what was true or not. And he would start fights with people. But he was kind of one of the most famous people in Rio de Janeiro. And they said, do you think it'd make a great film? And I was like, of course it will. But find this guy. And just so happened, a good friend, I'd worked in Brazil quite a few times. I used to work for the BBC. So I'd gone out there and doing some news and some sports stuff out there. And I'd done the World Cup a few months earlier. And a friend of mine who was sort of known as the world's most preeminent South American football journalist was in town, a guy called Tim Vickery. And he's been there for 21 years as an expat. And his job is to go and watch all these soccer games and tell people who's going to be great coming up and knows all these famous people. He was in town. So I met him the next week and we all went to the pub and he turned up in this it's kind of called a cricket jacket here in the UK. And it's a very sort of twee, very British upper class jacket. And he looks like he could be in the cricket house or a rowing event. And he said, why are you meeting me in the middle of London? We should be doing this in Rio when you're at an event. I said, tell us everything you need to know about Carlos Henrique Raposo, the Kaiser. And a smile came across his face, as wide as you can imagine. He said, now that's the best story I've ever heard in 21 years of living in Rio de Janeiro. And he said, well, how much of it is true? He said, no one knows. And that's the story. He said, if you can find him and get him on camera, he said, it's the best thing I've ever heard because everyone's got a story about this guy, but he's kind of elusive. And you know what? I wish I'd listened to those words earlier on in the filmmaking process because we went in with loads of risk. So sometimes you go and get commissions to make these things. I'm sure you interview loads of people that go, hey, yeah, we went to Netflix or we went to HBO and got this great project. They funded it. But this was so risky that we just knew that no one would take it because you've got to prove half of this stuff. And the legal cases are completely mad when you're trying to stand up half of these stories. So the guys, because they worked in the story, they had access to some capital, and they said they raised $50,000, something like that, and we took 2 camera guys over, and we didn't know if we were going to find the guy. And we went over, and we were either going to come back with a movie or the most expensive holiday of all time. And luckily, after a few days, we met the guy, and he turned up. We'd hired this flat opposite Sugarloaf Mountain, and it was a rooftop one, so we're thinking, invited him up, we'll get some drinks in, have a party, that's, the history of this guy is that he always bought the party. And this guy turned up sort of hobbling because he was always faking injury, I suppose. And his hair, he still had this big mullet and sunglasses on. His hair was so dyed so black it was blue.
Aye.
He immediately said, I actually don't drink. I've never drunk in my life. And we were like, okay, hide the booze, hide all the alcohol, all the rest of it. And we did a deal really quickly. And then he spoke for 2 hours nonstop. These incredible stories that had us on the floor laughing, right? Most of which weren't to do with football. All of which I totally believe, and 95% of them we could never put into print or or film because it was potentially libelous, right? It was to do with celebrities from all around the world coming to Rio, and he was the center of attention. And then we did the deal, and it was, he just has this aura about him, like we finished this meeting and we were like, this is incredible. We're like, wow, we're going to make a film here. And then he took us to one of the most exclusive restaurants in Rio de Janeiro on a Sunday. So it's the day that everyone has a barbecue and all the rest of it. So it's a big barbecue restaurant. And the queues, I mean, there must have been 300 in the queue. We hadn't made a booking and we walked right to the front and we were thinking, well, this is no good, we'll go somewhere else. And within 2 minutes of him speaking to the waitress at the front, he'd got us the best seat in the house. Wow. Right at the front. And we walked in and everything was for free. No problem. He sorted the whole thing right out. And from that day on, we went on this kind of crazy ride for 2 years. And most of it won't be in the film, but I mean, you can make a film about making the film, right? So he's a con man. He's trying to push his side of the story. And then after a while, we're trying to find out some sort of semblance of truth or some sort of alternate thing to make it something that you could make and distribute, because you can't just tell someone's version of the story. And it honestly, Kate, it went from everyone from, I mean, we're talking the world's greatest footballers, from Romario, Bebeto, Carlos Alberto, pretty much all the team that won the World Cup in USA 1994 were involved in this story, and we met pretty much all of them. And it went from the chief of police to we got hunted down by 2 separate mafia groups with guns and all the rest of it. And that it just spanned the entire city. And it was I've never experienced anything like it, and I doubt I ever will since, because it was just how one person with the power of his stories could get anyone to do anything. And he had nothing else. He's probably the most successful con person of all time, because no one really hated him. But he could get anything that he wanted, and anyone would do anything for him. And it was amazing, just totally amazing.
Where do you think that this began? Even as a child, do you think he kind of figured to maneuver his way through circumstances?
It was kind of tricky. I mean, I think it was difficult to get like a complete version of the truth out of it. And the last third of the film is because we confront him with a version, because we work out that some of his stuff isn't totally what he says it was, right? So, for anyone watching this film, this is a film about a guy who had a 26-year professional soccer career, never played a game, had all these amazing stories. And in reality, he has 10 to 20 amazing stories that he can tell word perfect. And what we found out, we did 4 or 5 documentary trips. So we did 72 interviews. And it was one of those stories that if you found somebody who wanted to be interviewed, you had to interview right there and then. There was no, let's do it tomorrow, because as soon as they had time to think about it, they didn't want to do it, because in reality, he bought the party, which meant he sorted out the women, he sorted out the drugs, he sorted out the good times, the bad times. He would cover up for people when they'd done something wrong and all the rest of it. So they knew that association with this guy, might not look so good to their, their wives or partners now that they're in their 50s or whatever. When we confronted him with the truth, he gave another version to the story that we'd heard before. But I think what was consistent from it was that his mum was an alcoholic. Rio's a hard place to live. It's one of those sort of places that if you've got a chance of being successful in business, or if you're going to be a lawyer or a football player, you can have everything. It's Ipanema, it's Copacabana, it's all those sort of things. But also right next to all those places are, really poor favelas that are really, really dangerous to live in. Now, Kaiser didn't come from a favela, but he came from a place sort of halfway between Botafogo and Flamengo, and it wasn't rich at all. So, it was hard to get by. And I think he realised that he was good with chat. He was very good looking when he was younger, no doubt about it. And so his way in life was to pretend to be a footballer and live off the trappings of it. And in the end, people believed him. And so he got what he wanted. And then he became friends with the footballers who liked him. Mm-hmm. And then because he sorted out all that stuff, then all of a sudden he had a social currency like you wouldn't believe. And he never, I don't think he stole loads of money or anything along those lines. But what he did do is that he kept up his social currency, which meant that he could do anything that he wanted and could live the high life. I mean, Carlos Alberto Torres, before he died, and he's the guy that captained the greatest ever soccer team of all time in 1970, scored one of the best goals of all time. It's an iconic goal, and you'll see it next summer when the World Cup happens there. That goal will be played over and over again as this guy. And he said to us, Kaiser had more influence in society than he did.
Wow.
So if he wanted a hotel or a restaurant in the Brazilian version of Saint-Tropez, which is Buzios, or in Rio, he wouldn't call them up because he couldn't get the table. He'd call Kaiser, and then Kaiser would sort it out for him like that straight away. And if he needed anything, he would go to him. He'd sort it all completely. So that's kind of how he did his work. It was kind of amazing. So I think it was hustle. It was just hustle, day in, day out. And he's never lost it. He still has it now. You know, I speak to him fairly regularly, and he's still up to something. He's the best PR man I've ever met. There were no football agents around at the time. This whole WME, CAA, you know, like actors, directors, and football managers have now didn't really exist in Brazilian football in that time. So I think if that had have existed, he probably would have been one of those. But instead, he was a fake footballer. You know, that's how he did it.
Well, also, how do you think that this story was possible pre-internet?
Well, it's perfect.
Right.
You can't check anything. What do you check? I mean, we did our due diligence, and I think the only time I ever get real criticism of the film is from sports people who are like really into facts and figures. And with sports, that happens all the time because people get really obsessive about facts and figures. I mean, look at anyone that likes baseball, you know, like there's going to be, you know, the most facts and figures game going, right? So they were like, well, surely you just check with the clubs and talk about it. And he would almost certainly never really be on the record of a club. And we did ask, but they would deny it. But then when you spoke to the people that run the clubs, and we're talking managers, so like team coaches, presidents, they all said, no, he was there. We had him. And we checked with the Brazilian Football Association, and there were 7 Carlos Kaisers from that time. And so he would create different like by changing a letter. So it'd be, we know him as Kaiser, but then there'd be Kayser and KaiYser and all the rest of it. And they'd all be very similar. And then he would just pick and choose which one it was and all the rest of it. And so no one could really check. He also had a system, and this isn't in the film because it was a bit too technical. And we can talk about how you structure something like this, but I very much went on, tried to reflect in somehow what we went through, which is, you know, trying to be conned by a con man, and then dealing with all this complete madness. And what we realized was the whole thing is about the power of story and what you believe and why you believe it, which is what we ended up going for. And it was just completely maddening, really. And so what he did, so he didn't put this in the film, but he, at the time in Brazil, you could go and train at a club and they'd have to give you a 2-week contract as soon as you walked into a club. So as soon as you went into a training session, you'd have 2 weeks. And if you were there for longer than 2 weeks, they had to give you a 3-month contract. That was the labour laws at the time. So he'd worked it out really quickly. So he would go into a club, do his tests, day 1, day 2. Then there'd be some fitness work, and he was quite fit. So he would go and do, you know, the running and the jumping and all the rest of it. He was terrible with the football. But by the time the ball came along, he had already managed to sort out a few sponsorship deals for some of the players, like a watch deal or a drinks deal or whatever like that. And then he would pull up injured. And then by the time he'd been there for 2 weeks, they'd have to give him the contract. So he'd have the identification card. And that's all he ever wanted. He didn't really care about the pay. It was the fact that he could then go use that to go and get something bigger. So this, for him, it wasn't about being a footballer. It was about what could you get in society. And he could get anything that he wanted. Any restaurant, any club. I don't think he paid rent or mortgage for several years because a lot of these footballers were so famous that they would go and stay.
Sure.
I mean, there was a very famous story, which we couldn't put in, and I won't mention any names, but I could tell the general version of it was Romario, he's now the governor of Rio de Janeiro, but one of the most famous footballers of all time. And at the time that Kaiser was hanging around with him, he was playing for Barcelona. He'd scored all those goals in USA 94. He was playing in Europe, and his flat was given to Kaiser on Copacabana, right? So like luxurious penthouse thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if this was in LA, you're talking $30 million type, that sort of stuff. Kaiser had the run of the place for free. Kaiser goes out to a restaurant. It's like a restaurant in a shopping mall, and that's what happens over there. There's all these big luxurious shopping mall, and he's there looking $1 million with his sunglasses and his big mullet and looking like a pro and all the rest of it. He's wearing half of Romario's gear, so he looks like he still plays for one of the big teams. And this super famous Brazilian singer comes along, and I'm not going to mention her name, but she's like, the Brazilian Taylor Swift, right? You know, of the era comes in, and then he just goes, "Oh, it's so hard being famous in Rio de Janeiro, like I have to wear these glasses and all the rest of it." And she goes, "Oh, I know, darling," and all the rest of it. And they get on well, and then he takes her to one of the restaurants that he's been to, and they're loving it because this really famous singer is in here. So then all of a sudden that's on the front pages of the next, that's the PR bit and all the rest of it. And then he conducts a 6-month affair with this person, all the while staying in Romario's flat, and that would be the stories that he would come up with. And we didn't believe half of them, but then it was when we started contacting some of the famous actresses from the era, and she said, "Oh, darling, I can't talk about him on camera, but he was the best fuck of my life," and all the rest.
No way.
Yeah, he had it. He just had the chat. He just did it. And it was what was really weird about it, Kate, was that by the time that we met him, he was, he'd had an eye condition. He was hobbling quite a lot. He just didn't look as, age had caught up with him a bit. And so it was kind of hard to kind of believe. But then once you saw the old footage of him and the old pictures of him that came through, you're like, oh, I could see why. I mean, someone that's not interested in a full-on relationship, and he looks the part. He says he's a footballer. He's out with famous footballers. He said, "Oh yeah, he trains with us, no problem. Why wouldn't you go along with it?" He just knew it was all about the psychology of what you will believe. And that's what he went with.
When I put together my bag each day, I need the essentials, my wallet, my keys, and I also need my liquid IV, which is helping me stay hydrated throughout the whole day. You can break the mold and own your own ritual with just 1 stick and 16 ounces of water, which hydrates better than water alone. Powered by Hydroscience, an optimized ratio of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration, 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink. 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. And I gotta tell you, the best flavors. You have a multitude of flavors, acai berry and lemon lime to pina colada, or you can choose from their line of sugar-free flavors like raspberry lemonade, white peach, and rainbow sherbet. Get ready for a long day with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code Kate Casey at checkout. That's 20% off your first order with code Kate Casey at liquidiv.com.
Running a business can be exhausting. Building your website shouldn't be. With Wix, you can express your ideas, give direction, then leave the heavy lifting to AI. From site creation to branded content and images. Have fun with the details. Customize what you want the way you want. And manage your whole business from a centralized dashboard with expert AI tools. Build, scale, and enjoy the incredible results. You can do it all yourself on Wix.
It's kind of an interesting story to look back at now, because we live in a time where influencers have so much power. Like likes and followers is currency in most places in the world now. And he was almost like before his own time.
Yeah, massively so. And like, yeah, hugely. I mean, you know, normally when I do these interviews, we talk about like which club he played for, who he played with, and all the rest of it. And I do those, and it's fine. It serves an audience, but really, the film is about this belief and this influence, right? And it was such a shame that you couldn't put half the stories in print or film. You can put more in print than you can in film, because we have to run it through UK law, and it's very libelous over here. And,
right.
you know, like if you can get it away here, you're basically fine for the rest of the world. And so there's just so much we couldn't get away with or put in, all the rest of it. But all that stuff, completely true. Anything to do with him on the pitch, just didn't believe it at all. Just didn't, you know, it never happened. Didn't matter. You know, he was so bad at football. I mean, it wasn't like he was a superstar and couldn't be bothered. He couldn't kick a ball. He was really bad. And I can relate to that. I'm so dyspraxic. I can't, you know, I'm not that good at this stuff either, but I'm not pretending to do it. But when he was and still is such a phenomenon that he was a master of his craft, really. So he could create a story out of anything. There's one really amazing story where he's just walking around near the French embassy, and the anti-nuclear demonstrators were out that day, and they'd shut down the road, and France had conducted a nuclear test, and for some reason in Rio de Janeiro they're protesting outside the French embassy. So quick as a flash, Kaiser goes, I know how to get on top of this, and he goes and finds the journalists, and he makes a scene where he's just trying to get into the embassy, and he's like, this is so bad. He said, you know, I'm a footballer and I play in France. Okay. And I need to go and get my visa sorted. And now, like, if I don't get my visa sorted, I can't get my flight tomorrow, which means I'm going to miss the start of the season, and then I get sacked and all the rest of it. It's all terrible. And it was complete lies, the entire thing. But you know what? When the article gets released on page 1 or 2 of O Globo newspaper, which goes nationwide, Kaiser's name's right at the top of the copy. Like, it would go, the anti-CND nuclear process was there. It's really terrible. The offset was, oh, look, there was this footballer, Carlos Kaiser, etc., who plays for Ajaccio in France. You know, one of the very few Brazilian footballers that play a part, and he can't go and get his visa now. How terrible that was. And he knew exactly what to do. He knew exactly what would make these headlines. But, you know, I don't know how it corresponds to influencers now, but because it is a different world. But it felt more genuine and intuitive, I suppose. I mean, if you look at stuff that goes on TikTok and Instagram now, it's quite formulaic, even though it's seemingly not. You know, it's quite simple messaging and short form format. This guy would find a way anywhere to find influence. And his currency would always be, he would do something for you, so you owed him a favour. So our direct experience of that was when we first went over. We were 2 English and 2 Irish lads coming from the UK. And, you know, for the first 2 trips, he thought that obviously what we'd want to go to is the brothels of Rio de Janeiro. And he was always trying to engineer it, and we're not like that. And then on trip 2, he found out that my wife was pregnant. So it very quickly turned from going to brothels to, like, here's baby gifts. Oh, I've got you a signed Flamengo shirt from a really famous person for your baby when it turns up, and you know, and all this sort of stuff. So it would be, and he would never go, no, I don't want anything. But then he knew that by doing something for you now, later you would owe him, and that was his currency. You know, it's kind of amazing, really.
Very clever, very clever.
And then also, like, right at the same time, and I'm not going to comment too much on politics, he was so good at coming up with those stories and creating a splash and diverting attention. And half the film is that, you know, when you get to the last part of it, you see he completely flips the story away from all the things he's been saying to you. And then once we show him that not all of this is true, he completely, it's like we call it dead cat bounce over here in the UK, which is it again came to prominence after we worked with Kaiser. But he say you're at a dinner table and someone's talking about me having an affair on my wife and it's all really terrible and I'm an awful man, all the rest of it. But you come in and you throw a dead cat on the table and everyone's really shocked and it's awful and it's terrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what's the outcome of it? What's actually happening there? Are people talking about the affair? They're not. They're talking about the dead cat that's on the table, right? And Kaiser was doing this with us all the time, every single day. Like, and because we were trying to find out interviews outside of his control, because we realised everyone was parroting his line. So we went to go and find people and not tell him about it. But within a couple of hours, he'd phone us up and say, "I know you've interviewed that person." You know, he would find out in an instant. It was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing. So he would create these really big statements that would shock us all. And as we were making that, the 2016 election was happening, and then you had, we started off with Zing, and then it was almost like kind of replicating what was happening in US politics at the time, and then what would happen again with Bolsonaro and all the rest of it. Like, it was kind of so far ahead of his time in that sense. It was just amazing to see, and how that can control us all.
How did the Brazilian football environment at the time enable this kind of deception?
Well, I mean, the 3-month contract thing, I think.
Yeah.
At the time, and I don't think this could happen. You're right. So this could only happen in Rio de Janeiro, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think it'd happen anywhere else in Brazil, although parts of this did happen in Sao Paulo or whatever. But, people from Rio are called cariocas, and there's a certain way of being in Rio, which is fairly hard to get your head around when you're first properly working there. So our first week we interviewed the national team doctor and lawyers and all the rest of it, and I couldn't really trust whether they were lawyers or not, because they were turning up to interviews in sandals and beach gear and all the rest of it. But that's kind of the Rio way, right? And they were also just generally, they're kind of easygoing. There's a lot of chat. There's lots of good talk going on. People are a bit more whimsical, a bit flaky, but when they turn up, they bring the life to the party, right? So that's kind of the scene there, even still today. So I think this happens in Rio, not Sao Paulo, not Manaus, not any of those places. It happens in Rio. And then at the time, there was just the world seemed to be freer. So. Mm-hmm. I think the film really works because everyone's so open and funny. Mm-hmm. You couldn't do that so much more today, especially with Brazilian football, because half the people who are really good at football get brought up at the age of 15. We've got 2 playing for my local team, Brighton, down the road. We have João Pedro, who plays for, I think he plays for the Seleção now, the Brazilian national team, but that guy left at the age of 15. They all leave. Whereas back in the day, the culture is we play football, then we go to the beach, and then we go have a barbecue and a bar, and then everything's a bit more free and easy. And so it could all happen there because of that. It happened because of the 3-month contract thing. And then look, as time went on, he became such good friends with them all that clubs would hire him to sort people out. There was one club who'd had a player who had been playing for the national team, but he'd turned to alcoholism. So they hired Kaiser to look after him and stop him. So he became
irony.
Yeah. No, he flipped. Well, the guy who actually hired him to do that said he was just the most strange case he'd ever seen. This guy doesn't work in football anymore. He's now a psychiatrist, and he said he's even his brain. He said there's something very twisted about it, because it wasn't as if he knew. We say it there's a line in the film that says it, which is, if you say a lie 3 times, it becomes the truth.
Right.
Right. And that's generally the truth for anything, right? We can all make ourselves believe, want to believe if you keep on saying this stuff. But he said it was almost as if he believed it so much that he could never go back from it. To him, he was a footballer, but he wasn't. He said it was kind of infuriating, but he said because he'd had those connections with these players, that he had to, he realised that he had to bring him in. He had to have him as part of the team because it sorted out their star player, because he was drinking too much. So Kaiser would stop him, or if he would go out with him and like stop him after 3 and then take him back and all that sort of stuff. So it became that blurred line between what's truth and reality and where you're all supposed to be. And it's completely nuts, right? I mean, look at most American sports, look at the NFL draft. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. I mean, like, sure, people are drinking, sure, people have affairs, sure, all this stuff happens, but like, it's known you wouldn't have someone on the roster that's completely fake, right? You might have that character as part of the backroom staff or whatever, and all teams would do that. There will be someone who covers up and all that sort of stuff, but no one that's actually, got their pen pick, available to buy in the club shop, kind of crazy.
I think people would also want to know, was there anyone along the way who could tell that this was a con? It's just their voice was so quiet compared to the power that he had.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Yeah, and again, that plays up a little way in the film. So I won't go too far in it, but I mean, we had our suspicions after 2 trips, right? So we went over and, the first few days we didn't find him. Then we started interviewing people, and it was the dodgy doctor in Lapa, who actually was a doctor, but, couldn't, it felt wrong to us. And then minor people around the side. And then on the day 3, we ended up having this interview with a transgender funk singer in a brothel who was claiming never to have sexual relations with this guy, but he wanted him. And it was brilliant fun. But like, not a film. Like, we're spending some serious money. We need someone famous to say, yeah, he was there.
Right.
And then 2 days after that, we get Carlos Alberto Torres, El Capital, like one of the most famous footballers of all time, like, number 2 to Pele, in Brazilian history, right? Saying, yeah, I had him at 2 clubs. He said, Enigma, like crazy guy. And you think, right, okay, now we have a story, and it was sort of amazing. But so the first 2 trips were kind of great because we're getting more of these stories and we're hearing all the hits, right? And they're in the film. If people choose to look at it, the time where he starts, the Brazil's biggest mafia boss has hired him to play for a small club called Bangu. Kaiser's not played for a few months, and then he demands that he plays a match, and he's on the substitutes bench, and then they go 2-0 down, and then they make Kaiser go on, but he's terrible at football and he's really scared. And like the Castro de Andrade is the guy, the mafia boss's name. He's in the stands and he's thinking this guy's the most dangerous man in Brazil, which he was. Well, how do I get out of it? And so what he does is he does his warm-ups before he comes on, and he sees some fans getting quite angry and shouty. So he jumps over the fence and starts a fight with some of the fans, gets himself sent off so he can't come off the pitch, so he doesn't have to play and show that he's really bad. And then the mafia boss comes in at half time and starts having a go at him. And he says, before you go too far, I just want you to say, like, I know this looks really bad at me, but those fans were telling me that you killed that person last week in this, quite public shooting in the town. And I was defending your honor, sir. And they were all saying all such things like you were a drug trafficker and all the rest of it. And I was defending your honor. And the mafia Castro de Andrade starts smiling and gives him a 3-month contract extension. So it's an amazing story, which actually it turned out to be true, we think, because but for months we just didn't know, because what everyone would tell the story word by word the same, right? The same lines. And there'd be, as I say, probably 10 to 15 or whatever of these. But nothing else really. There would be like, here's his famous stories. He's a great guy. He did this for me. Obviously, no one's going to say, oh, he took me to a brothel or whatever.
Right.
Like, leave all that stuff out. But after a while, we were like, there's got to be more to it. So we started doing our digging. And one of the restaurant owners, a really great sushi restaurant in Rio, run by an ex-Mossad Israeli guy. I don't know why he was living in Rio de Janeiro. He's in the film. He's a funny guy. And we did this interview and it was incredible. And he said, it's all bullshit, don't you? I was like, yeah, we knew, but we need to try and prove it. He said, well, I'm ex-Mossad. And when I turned up, Kaiser was big. Like, he was bigger than a footballer, right? Should be, like he was your size. And, I mean, at the time, I think I was like 14 stone, right? Not 11.
Right.
What would that be? That'd be 80 something kilos, not 60. I remember him like this. And actually, you need to speak to this guy and this guy. And then one of the guys we'd already spoken to that earlier that week. So we phoned him up again and said, we know the truth. And then he agreed to come back on camera and then bring the proof that this stuff didn't quite add up and all the rest of it. But it was really weird. People, they came out with their confessions on it, but they didn't hate him. They were like, no, we loved him for it. But now this is going so big, like you're doing a film that's going to be distributed everywhere. And I think we've been in most major countries on TV or a streaming service, for a while now. So I think they were right to, back themselves up. They were like, yeah, no, this is, he would fake things and all the rest of it. And we all went along with it because, the benefits to us were, we would get a really nice dinner like once every month or whatever, or he would sort us out an amazing holiday. And this is his currency.
Wow.
So but like the web of it, Kate, it was completely mad, and we would do interviews and then people would tell us one thing and then we would totally disbelieve it. It was just, complete, dare I swear, head fuck the entire thing.
And well, it sounds like it. Just completely maddening. Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course, I think he operated in such every single transaction for him was a transaction, and it was not a cut and shut thing unless he was taking something for now. If it was an interaction with someone, it was about a transaction that was ongoing. So what does that mean? That means, he would remember that X football player had 2 kids and they liked shirts, so they would have those shirts, and he would remember their names and all the rest of it, and then he would ask something for them back. He would be gopher for the mafia, but he would make them feel good, so they wanted him around. The chief of police would get sorted out. There would be a different transaction that would be ongoing there. It would be every single part of his life. He had it. There was again, not in the film, but there was a newspaper article from not too long before we started filming with a famous footballer who had crashed his car in one of the tunnels in Rio. And it was all over the front page, and it was, hey, this famous player has crashed his car. He'd been at a party and his friend was driving him his home, and, look how bad it was. And the friend, of course, was Kaiser, and the car had crashed and had been totaled, right? But Kaiser's blind in one eye and has never been able to drive, right? So what would have happened there is that person would have gone, I've crashed a car. What do I do? Kaiser, here now, come here. And then he would be the person that he'd get there before the press would get there.
Right.
He would take the blame. Right. So amazing, that was his network. And, so yeah, crazy to be part of.
Lamont Jones's world is shattered when his cousin dies in custody just weeks after entering prison. The official report says natural causes, but bruises and missing teeth tell a different story. From Wondery comes Death County, PA, a chilling true story of corruption and cover-ups that begins as one man's search for answers, but soon reveals a disturbing pattern. Lamont's cousin's death is just one of many, and powerful forces are working to keep the truth buried. With never-before-heard interviews and shocking revelations, Death County, PA pulls back the curtain on one of America's darkest institutional secrets. This isn't just another true crime story. It's happening right now. Follow Death County, PA on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes of Death County, PA early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus.
Hey, I'm Mike Corey, the host of Wondery's podcast, Against the Odds. In each episode, we take you to the edge of some of the most incredible adventure and survival stories in history. In our next season, it's 1980, and in the Pacific Northwest, the long-dormant volcano Mount St. Helens is showing signs of life. Scientists warn that a big eruption is coming, but a restricted zone around the mountain is limited by politics. On May 18th, hikers, loggers, reporters, and researchers are caught in the blast zone as the volcano erupts. They find themselves pummeled by a deadly combination of scorching heat, smothering ash, and massive mudslides. The survivors have to find their way to safety before they succumb to their injuries, or face another eruption. Follow Against the Odds on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Binge the entire season ad-free right now only on Wondery Plus. Start your free trial in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify today.
Do you think there's any person in history that has ever come close to this kind of personality and power?
Well, when we released in the UK, we had to go and get a special screening license because it could have done well in the cinemas. Was at that time when cinemas weren't doing so well, and documentaries and all the rest of it. So we got a guy called Professor Kevin Dutton, who's the world-leading expert on psychopaths and con men.
Oh.
And he had been can't remember the guy's alive, but friends with Frank Abagnale from Catch Me If You Can.
Okay.
And a guy called Howard Marks, who's very famous in the UK because he was a drug trafficker who'd moved stuff from Ibiza, and he'd interviewed them all. His dad was a con man, that's why he became a professor in it. So he did a psychological test on a screening of Kaiser. And he came back, he said he's not a psychopath because he has empathy, and he interviewed other people as well. And his view is that he's the most successful con person of all time. Because although he's been caught, the most successful con people of all time have never been caught, okay? And there's loads of them out there, right? It's happening all the time. He said, but he's been caught, but he's really successful because it went on for so long. Like if you look at Catch Me If You Can, like half that stuff never happened. It's all been written for Hollywood. Okay, the guy just wire forwarded a few checks for it. They made that bigger than it was. Kaiser's plays were so elaborate and so true, and yet no one seemed to hate him. So in his mind, he said he's the best one of all time because when often these cons are really horrible. People get really screwed for money. They really get taken. And I'm sure, there's only so much you can research and do when you're doing these things and don't have access to his entire life. I'm sure he may well have, there may well be a story where someone has felt wronged from Kaiser's, doing, as we all can. But what we generally found was that even the people that confessed didn't hate him. They were like, no, we love him, but, this can't go on and all the rest of it. And, I have to state my truth and all those sort of things. So I'm not sure that it did happen. Then again, would it have gone on so long if he had taken people for loads of money? I don't, if he had extorted these footballers for loads and loads of money, I think they would have not been around him anymore. I think he knew roughly where the line was. And so he's a fascinating character, and it's so strange. I mean, he's now in the Brazilian football museum. He's got his own little segment in there, and you think how good Brazilian football is. I mean, it's it's such a big brand. I mean, and you'll see it next summer. It's going to be, even though they're not a particularly good team at the moment, they're going to be marketed by everyone, especially Nike, right? They're so big, and he, after the film came out, he went on the Brazilian football TV shows giving analysis of players who played well and this guy never played a game, and he still gets caught up about it. He's like this. He's just a character that exists, and an amazing marketing machine.
Yeah.
I remember it. We had that release in the UK, and I remember I was doing some advert work for a broadcaster, and so I was in this weird position whereby we had this upcoming release coming up, and then I was working, doing other stuff. But then I was getting called on all these TV shows and newspaper shows and all the rest of it, and TV shows and radio shows and newspaper articles, and and like national stuff like BBC, CNN, all this stuff, huge stuff, right? And the guy who was running the campaign that I was actually working on was saying, "Where did you get all this press from? Like, how much have you spent on this?" And I was like, "Nothing. It's just the power of a good story." I used to work in news. We'd had a book out, so the combined PR of it meant that we had spread everywhere, and it went worldwide. And I said, "Oh, how much would you have paid for a campaign for this?" He was like, $3-4 million. That's what we would pay for coverage like this. And I was like, "Wow, we did all this for free." Anyway, the two of the tabloid newspapers in the UK, the Mirror and the Sun, obviously loved it because it's right up target market, and they still run the story every now and again. They still regurgitate it. But they thought, do you know what we need to do? We need to go and get a journalist to go and interview this guy outside of the filmmakers. They'd seen the film, they'd read the book, they'd seen the copy, they'd interviewed us. So they both hired someone to go and interview him in Rio. And it turned out they'd hired the same guy, right? So the one newspaper fixer in Rio, and he phoned me up and said, "Can you please don't tell them that I'm doing the same thing?" I was like, "Oh, it's fine." Anyway, he'd gone to interview Kaiser, and he called me up afterwards. He said, "That was the most extraordinary day I've ever had in my life. I've just never met anyone like it," right?
Wow.
And we had, funny enough, I was just in my garage cleaning up, having a tidy up, and I came across the newspapers, and there were these 4-page spreads, center page with front page leaders of like the most incredible football story never told. I was like, this is brilliant press.
Mm-hmm.
And the interview was incredible. And he phoned me up and said it was fantastic. And then a week later, the guy calls me up again. He said, he's just a machine. I said, "Oh, what's he done now?" He said, I didn't tell him which newspaper I was writing for, but he's worked out that they're tabloid. It's like, it's not broadsheet, it's not intelligent newspaper stuff, it's kind of sex, all the rest of it. So he's done his research and found out what he's done. And I said, "Oh, okay, so what's he done?" He said, "Well, he's phoned me up and he said, now I'm famous in the United Kingdom and everyone knows who I am. They might be interested in the story, and I've got to tell you first before she leaks it. But this transgender funk singer is going to come out to the press and tell me that I've been having an affair with her, and I just want you to know it's not true. Before she contacts you." And then later on in the day, she calls him up and starts trying to sell this newspaper affair about how the famous Carlos Kaiser had been romantically linked to him. And he'd worked it all out. He'd done all that work. The same lady that we'd interviewed, right? It didn't end the film. And he'd done his research, and he knew exactly where to hit. He knew exactly the target market. And he wouldn't have offered that. And 3 weeks after that, we had a 2-page spread in Der Spiegel, which is like a really high-end.
In Germany.
Yeah, Germany. So this is like New York Times / Post type stuff, right? And he didn't go back to them with that story. It was, would you like an exclusive interview with Carlos Alberto and all the rest of it? He'd found that interviewer and like completely changed the script. So he knew exactly, and like he'd never heard of these publications before, right? By the way, he'd like no idea. So he'd done his research, worked it out and done, right, okay, that's how I target this, and this.
Wow.
Amazing.
Well, I'm like, is he going to call me?
We might. Wow. Have a nice chat to him. He's all right. He's harmless. Yeah.
Hi, Carlos. If you're listening. Yeah.
Well, he'd sort you out in Rio. I mean, he'd sort you out a good night. I mean, no doubt about it.
I'm going to Rio.
Yeah, well, I always want to go back. I went back for the first time in sort of 7 years over the last summer, and I had a little cry because we lived there pretty much for like 7 months over 2 years. And so you get to know the place, and I learned Portuguese through the whole thing, and I got really into the music. We made music. It was a time of pure creativity. And yeah, I mean, it's got this reputation of being a very dangerous city, which, I mean, I think it is more dangerous than it was when we started, because we started whilst the Olympics were still on, so that the whole thing had been shut down. There was no problems. And then
I'm sure.
Then I always remember after the documentary part of it finished, we've dramatized quite a lot of the film. So we finished the documentary, started cutting it, making it all work. And then like, okay, right, how do we make this come to life? We've got certain images, certain bits of footage of it, but how do we make this look real? And so we had to go back and look at drama locations and cast actors. And I mean, there's a million stories there as well. But in that 6-month period, it'd gone from 40 murders over 6 months to 2,000,
wow.
It just ramped up super quick, like it all kicked off again. So it has this kind of dangerous reputation, but it's also like just a city full of life, and complete carnage, it's completely, you have to suspend all belief and to go along with it. And then once you're in, it's fun, right? It's a completely different normality.
Well, I can't help but notice you have this picture in your office of him.
I do. Yeah, that's we made some music for the film, and it did really well. The title track of it, it's probably not famous in America, but there's a band called the Kaiser Chiefs over here, and it's an iconic song called "I Predict a Riot," which is "I Predict a Fight," and it's a really famous song. And we were having a few caipirinhas on the beach, and we were quite a few deep by that point, and we said, "Hang on, he's started a fight. He's called Kaiser. It's a riot. We need to make this in like sort of samba style." So we managed to get up with the Kaiser Chiefs, and they sort of found it quite funny. So they agreed to make this version of it, and it ended up as one of the BBC's top 20 tunes of 2018. And that's, my sister had made a lino print of him for the title artwork, and that was the front page of the vinyl, and so like the whole thing. So there's so much fun associated with it. I mean, honestly, I could go on for hours with the various different things that happened with, as I say, mafia bosses turning up, and it's a story like no other, And the documentaries are fun because you get to meet, you get to go into worlds, okay? And you get to, it's like, I always think it's like doing a master's degree, so not quite
without question. Yeah.
And so you meet, because you meet the people that do this stuff. You meet the people that have been through it or have, like done something amazing or something terrible, or all these sort of things. But that one was like that on steroids, because it was just a complete suspension of any type of normality, and you can't think logically with it. There's no point in thinking logically with the story. There's just 0 point. And what you have to do, like our job, and I say it's ours because we all lived it, and then it was mine and the editor's job really was to Steve Williams, who's fantastic, was to go, right, how do we take these experiences legally on screen and get it to a way that people can enjoy it and then potentially understand it and, go with it. And I don't think I'd changed too much on it. I mean, I think, I think the best thing we ever did was that we stopped trying to find out what the ultimate truth was. And I remember and we still do screenings now, and there's always this bit of like, right, who believes this and who believes that? And it's different every single time. And then people ask you, and I said, it depends on the day. I don't know what I believe.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because that's the point, And look at politics now. I mean, it's, what's true and what's not. You can take your pick, choose what you want. So amazing, really, really amazing.
Such an amazing story, and I really appreciate walking me through it. And I can only imagine that this is a project that will stay with you for a long time. Is there sort of one aspect of it that changed you as a filmmaker?
I think the most exciting part of it was risk. And we're all in a place now where risk isn't happening. So what does that mean? I'm sure you do loads of these interviews with lots of people who really big up their projects, but times are tough in television and film at the moment. Like, there's, and I'm blessed to have projects going on and happy and all the rest of it, but it is so much harder to raise money to do stuff. It's so much harder to get anything away. And look, let's hope that changes, and I'm sure it will over time, right? But, ultimately, there's a multitude of reasons for it. Not least, there's a appetite from streamers to not take those risks, especially with factual documentary reality TV, right? Because it's harder to sell an unknown story, right? It's got to be so good and tick all these right boxes. Whereas you can have an unknown story being made into a drama, but if you attach Leonardo DiCaprio to it, it doesn't matter if it's unknown or not. You've got Leonardo DiCaprio, right? You know, that's the kind of thing. So I think what I learned from it was actually and it's more what I've learned since, is that a lot of the other projects since have had less risk attached to it and been more sort of not told what to say, but sort of like given guardrails as to where you can go, because, you know, you've got to tick certain boxes or hit a certain audience point at a certain thing or the rest of it. Whereas this one, those guardrails weren't there. And there was that freedom of expression that I had and that we all had, which is exciting. And I think any filmmaker wants that. And we will all seek it in a certain way. So you'll do the stuff that's got the guardrails up because it pays and it gets you on Apple or Netflix or Disney or Hulu or wherever you're making it for. But then there's that bit of like, okay, where does that true creativity come from? And it was just amazing to have that, the money, the time, and just the freedom to really come up with something unique.
What a story. What a story. I'm so grateful for your time. Tell everybody where they can find you and what you're working on now.
I'm on, if you search Louis Myles, LOUISMYLES, my socials will be on there somewhere on Google, but mainly do Instagram these days. Funny enough, I never said I'd do another con story again, but I've just done one about a guy who takes over a small English football team called Notts County, the oldest professional football club in the world, and they're really bad at the time. They're really down in the lower leagues, and it's taken over by a Middle Eastern investment consortium. And they go and get the ex-England football manager involved and the ex-England captain involved. And it looks amazing. It's all wonderful. But no money ever turns out of the club. And a Guardian journalist starts investigating it all. And he quickly finds out that this guy, the guy behind it is a guy called Russell King, who has had a series of cons. And he had crashed half of the island of Jersey in a huge multi-billion-dollar fraud, and loads of companies associated with it. And now he was doing this at the same time he was trying to buy a Formula One team and nearly got the BMW Sauber team. And as the story goes on, and it all turns out that it's all a massive ploy he's got the mineral mining rights for all of North Korea. And so as all of this is being revealed in the press, they then find out that the ex-England manager, Sven-Göran Eriksson, is with this guy, Russell King, with the president of North Korea in Pyongyang, trying to do this deal until they clock that this guy is a con man as well. And the whole thing comes crashing down. It feels like I revealed a lot about the story there, but I haven't, because we've got a load of new information about a new con.
It just kind of like still come bubbling up.
And we basically go into the mind of a proper psychopath.
Wow.
And a con man. So that's coming out in the UK about 3 months' time, and I think there's been a deal with in the US, but I should have checked that out before this interview. But you know, it's on the market out there.
Well, we'll still try to find it. Yeah.
And then the other one was I'd made a film about a Down syndrome football team, which a short film which released at Tribeca in 23, and it's been doing the circuit for a year or two. That's now being developed out into a feature. It qualified for Oscar, longlisted for BAFTA, and it won the UK Doc of the Year. And it's a beautiful story. That's probably the best thing I've ever done, I think, just because the emotion within it's so huge.
Mm-hmm.
So all that sort of stuff. And then on drama side, we're working with Alcoholics Anonymous to getting a screenplay written about the origin of the whole organisation.
Wow.
So that's our big drama play at the moment. So plenty going on. Search my name out on Thingy if you're interested in getting in touch.
Thank you a million times. Appreciate it. Do you think Carlos is going to call me?
If you want me to give you his, I'm sure. You might be better going through me as a conduit. We'll see. Yeah, he might do. He's connected. He knows people,
Wow. What a story.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
The amazing Kate Casey.
I want to thank my fantastic guest, Louie, and remind you, make sure that you go to Prime Video and watch this documentary, and then get in the Facebook group, Reality Life with Kate Casey, and tell me what you thought about it. This is definitely one of those episodes where you're going to want to share it with your friends. It's such a bonkers story. Make sure that you are also subscribed to my What to Watch list at katecasey.substack.com. You're going to get a list of what to watch in unscripted TV every week, so you don't miss out on documentaries or reality shows like this. Then also make sure you are subscribed to this podcast. Please leave a 5-star review. Get the bonus episodes by going to Patreon, patreon.com/KCasey. And follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at @KCaseyCA, TikTok, it's KCasey, and Twitter, Threads, and Blue Sky at @KCasey. Check back tomorrow for an all-new episode, and next episode is crazy too.
In the first half of the 20th century, one woman changed adoption in America. What was once associated with the shame of unmarried mothers became not only acceptable, but fashionable. But Georgia Tann didn't help families find new homes out of the goodness of her heart. She was stealing babies from happy families and selling them for profit. Hi, I'm Lindsey Graham, the host of Wondery show American Scandal. We bring to life some of the biggest controversies in U.S. history, presidential lies, environmental disasters, corporate fraud. And in our latest series, a young adoption worker moves to Memphis, Tennessee, and becomes one of the most powerful women in the city. By the time her crimes are exposed, decades later, she's made a fortune and destroyed hundreds of families along the way. Follow American Scandal on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. Experience all episodes ad-free and be the first to binge the newest season only on Wondery Plus. You can join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Start your free trial today.